Hi, everybody. I'm with Lisa Lewin, partner here at Primary, former CEO of General Assembly. Lisa, I'm so excited to chat today. Thank you for taking the time.
I'm super excited to talk to you, Jackson. This is
Thank you.
awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you. We're here in New York City, and I'm curious, is there any room for New York to become maybe the number one tech and startup capital of the world one day, taking over Silicon Valley?
Oh, what a great way to start. I'm going to put on my bullish hat on. I think so.
Okay.
I think maybe so. I'll tell you what I think about when I think about what's our shot. First of all, we're having a great run.
Yeah.
So if you look at kind of just the value and dynamism in the venture ecosystem in New York over the last few years and compare it to, say, Silicon Valley, the value of that ecosystem is now about $700 billion or so,
Wow.
which is, yeah. And while Silicon Valley's is still larger, right around 2.x trillion, so we're about a third of the size, they're 3x larger, we've been growing 3x faster.
Wow.
So since sort of late 2019, if you look at just the amount of capital and the value of sort of, VC-backed assets over that period of time, it's grown over 35%.
Yeah.
Whereas over that same period of time, Silicon Valley's has grown about 10. So we're a third this, they're 3x bigger, but we're growing 3x faster. So at some point, those lines may just well cross,
For
Jackson.
sure, definitely. And you kind of mentioning, it's been growing just a ton in the recent history, but you've been in New York for over 20 years. And I'm curious, how have you seen the tech scene explode and grow since the early 2000s?
So when I came in 2003, right after I'd graduated from business school, all of my B school classmates were coming here to really work in the traditional industries. It was management consulting or investment banking for the most part. And then within a few years, you had the financial crisis. So, 2008, 2009, a lot of layoffs, and a lot of that exceptional talent pivoted into tech and into startups. And I feel like that was really sort of the inflection point that became that really became the fuel for this place becoming a new epicenter of tech. And wherever you have great talent, especially great talent ready to start something new, the capital is going to follow. And so that's how Primary, which was born in 2015, that's when Primary sort of said, we're long in New York. Like, we think that this is going to be the next most exciting city to back founders. And that is completely proven to be true.
There's a little bit of pushback against New York, though, in the sense of, maybe in my opinion and others as well, New York's way more distracting maybe than other cities like San Francisco, where, in New York you have, multiple different things people can get themselves into. Like, there's a fun nightlife, an incredible food scene, versus in San Francisco, I think a lot of the perception is you work and that's kind of it. I'm wondering if you think similarly, or you want to push back against that pushback about people being more distracted in New York versus other tech hubs like San Francisco.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about the sort of, cultural diversity and industry diversity in New York, like it's a bad thing. I actually think it's an incredible asset. I think it's a phenomenal asset, and I'll tell you why. First, just from an investment perspective, right? So one of the reasons why Brad Sverluga, Ben's son, our founders, kind of knew or had a sense, even though it was counterintuitive at the time, that this would be a great new tech hub was precisely because of its diversity of industry. You had media and advertising and healthcare and financial services, everything. And so you kind of say, look, all of these industries are going to have to undergo digital transformation, right? And so this is going to be a great place, right? This next generation of startups is effectively going to be creating technologies that all of those industries are going to want. And so building here actually has given startups over the last 10, 15 years access to large corporations who've been their clients.
Yes.
So, hence why you've seen a lot of the explosion of enterprise SaaS here in the city over the last few years. So that's industry diversity.
Okay.
And then you've got just the cultural diversity of the city. Again, not bashing San Francisco, love SF, love to spend time in Northern California, but I gotta say, I mean, just look at what's happened to these cities since the pandemic. You know, you go to San Francisco in 2019, downtown San Francisco, and it felt like it was super, super vibrant. If you've gone at any point in the last couple of years, you know, you can go to large swaths of San Francisco that feel like zombie town.
Yeah.
And why hasn't that happened in New York?
I was going to ask, well, that for sure, but also, why do you think that's happened in San Francisco? But you can finish your point on why that hasn't happened in New York first. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the answer is kind of the same,
Okay.
right? So when you have a one industry town and that industry goes from boom to bust, that talent kind of has to then figure out where else is it going to go.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas New York, because there are so many things to do, talent that's like great talent that's based in New York can stay in New York.
Yeah.
Right.
Because of other different, you know, avenues to go into. If you're like you know, an art tech founder, and if that doesn't work out, the tech scene doesn't work out, you can go into art because it's just a booming art community here in the city.
Absolutely. And honestly, doesn't everybody want to live in a place where they feel like they can have a rich and full life? I mean, the arts here, the sports here, the culture here, the fact that like 1 million different languages are spoken, and maybe it's not 1 million, but it's something like over 200 languages are spoken here. The diversity of the restaurants that we have. I mean, this is a great place to be. Like every year, young people graduate all over the world, and where do they want to come? They want to come here.
Absolutely. The nickname the greatest city in the world for a reason.
And that crazy bet on New York almost 10 years ago has really paid off, and I'm thrilled to say that we kind of have the receipts to prove it. I mean, we are now $1 billion in AUM.
I saw that. Congratulations.
We're on our 4th fund. Our first fund has 30% of the investments of the checks that we wrote in Fund 1 are now unicorns, which is 19x higher than the rest of the startup venture space. So we're really, really proud. We're proud of what we've done. We're proud of the way that we have really supported founders in that process. Yeah. And we'd make that same bet on New York again every day of the week.
That growth doesn't happen overnight, though. Like, what steps were taken to get from that number way early on to now, and what has gone through like the firm's growth and, you know, the work that's been done by the partners? What's been done in the past several years to get to this stage right here?
I mean, I think there are a few things related to our success. We've already talked about the kind of natural tailwinds in New York, the incredible density of like founding talent here. I would attach to that that Primary from the very, very beginning decided that it wanted to be a convener of the tech scene. If you look at an event like the New York City Summit, where we convene the entire sort of venture ecosystem, you know, other investors in the space, LPs, founders. I mean, that has helped us. It not only has it fueled the tech scene in New York, but it's also helped Primary establish a brand so that the best founders, you know, that like the 1% of the 1% of founders know that they can come to, know that they should come to Primary if they want to work with the best. And then I think the biggest sort of secret sauce has really been our impact team. And so, you know, we now have about 50 people on our team, and the majority of those folks are actually former operators, people who have kind of been there and done that have sat in the CHRO seat and the CRO seat or in the CEO seat. And so we kind of know both how to kind of maximize a founder's success and also how to minimize the pitfalls. And that kind of founder support, we call it, you know, wearing the founder's shoes. That kind of support sort of lends the portfolio companies that we invest into almost an unfair advantage because it really helps them accelerate their growth, accelerate their learning, and accelerate their progress.
And we've been talking a little bit about Primary right now, and I kind of want to pivot to Factor Fellowship and kind of just the philosophy around helping founders and getting diverse sorts of talent and people groups. So maybe, you know much better than I do, but maybe share a little bit more about Factor Fellowship and the whole idea around that and why now and what's been up to this last, since starting.
Awesome. Well, thank you for asking, Jackson. So first, a little bit about the Factor Fellowship. Mm-hmm. So this is an independent nonprofit that Primary has really taken the lead on helping to incubate. And the goal is effectively to go out and find some of that incredible talent, like the best and brightest that New York has to offer, that's in other industries, that may be in financial services, that may be in management consulting, that may be in the nonprofit sector and the public sector.
So not just in the tech scene, but they're like, they don't really work in the tech scene all too much. It's more bringing them into tech.
Exactly.
Okay.
The whole idea is to find great talent that's in New York that isn't already in New York's tech scene.
Got it.
And give them an invitation, invite them in to understand what it to get to know what it's like to work at a venture-backed startup. And why would we want to do that? So we want to do that for a couple of reasons. So number one, we do think that New York's tech scene is incredibly exciting, and a lot of people, especially in New York, the city that is literally known for hustle and grit, a lot of people want to break into it. But, you've been in and around, startups for a long time, as have I. And, this community is really good at kind of like recycling talent. Like once you're inside, once you're inside of the community, you're in.
It's hard to get out.
But sometimes it's hard to get out. That's a whole other thing. But we take for granted how hard it is to get in, right? It's a very network-driven industry.
Absolutely.
When founders are ready to hire someone, they usually have to hire fast. And so what they're going to do is they're probably going to call up their friends and say who's been at this other startup. And so we're recycling a lot of talent, but we're not bringing in a lot of net new talent, not enough. And so given that, again, this is the greatest and deepest pool of talent in the country and maybe even the world, we want to create a fellowship that gives folks an opportunity, people who are doing incredible things in other sectors, that gives them a little bit of a bridge to come in. And the reason that we've been really intentional about saying that there's also an inclusion and a diversity goal in this is because when if you look at the graduating classes of New York, 82% are going to be women or immigrants or people of color.
Wow.
82%.
Yeah.
And so just by going out and finding the best and brightest talent, that talent by definition in New York is going to be like super diverse. And that's what founders today what they want is the best talent.
For sure.
Right? They don't want just the talent that's already inside of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
They just want the best, period. And so that's what we're doing with Factor Fellowship.
How does Factor Fellowship find these people working in industries that aren't necessarily in tech? Is it more there's scouts that go and find them, or do they, do marketing to figure out who primary is? Because a lot of them don't know all the venture capitalists here in town. How do y'all find that kind of talent?
Absolutely. What a great question.
Okay.
So our selection process, we actually do all of those things. Okay. So we definitely go out and talk to a lot of the great kind of fellowships and programs that are cultivating talent at earlier stages. We're looking for people who already have work experience, maybe 3 to 6 plus years of work experience. Sure. So they're already killing it in some other field and in some other sector. They're just looking for that way into venture-backed startups. Right. So we'll definitely call up people who really know where talent is. And we also do some broad outreach. We host events here at Primary that people can sign up for and come and kind of learn what it's like to work at a venture-backed startup and see if it's really for them. And then after that, if they decide to formally apply, then we have a pretty rigorous and hyper-selective process where folks that are inside the industry, myself, some of our check writers here, and other VCs in the city are really looking out for who's going to be the next great the next great startup talent.
What is the next great startup talent? What do you look for when looking at a founder to see if they actually have what it takes to be the next? And I'll give examples just because they're big: Zuckerberg, Musk. Someone like that. Is there a characteristic you look for, or someone else at the firm looks for to find that talent?
Yeah. I mean, here's what I would say. I'll tell you what we look for, and I'll tell you what we don't look for, and we kind of ignore. Great. So what we look for, number one, is that it's pattern recognition. People who've had great achievement, great achievement academically or great achievement in their job. That usually tends to repeat itself. So we're definitely looking for folks who've done really exciting, ambitious things. And then the second thing is we're just looking for hustle and drive, which is very easy to find in a city like New York.
For sure.
Just to live here, you kind of have to have a lot of internal drive and grit. If this is your place, you probably already have quite a lot of ambition and hustle. So that's second. And then third, a real desire to like be part of startups. Working for a startup is very different like than working for, say, a corporate. It's, it's riskier.
It's easier to hide at a big corporate job too versus like a team of 10.
It's easier to hide in a large corporate, and also it's, and you're not gonna necessarily have somebody telling you what to do every day. You're gonna have to figure a lot out, and there are people who love that and people who really don't like that, and it's the people who love that we think are really going to succeed.
We've talked about diversity a lot in this conversation. I'm curious. There's been a big push towards DE&I initiatives here in venture and startups and tech, and I'm curious. Do you think that with more and more of these initiatives being pushed, has it actually helped with diversity, with equity, with inclusion in the tech and startup world?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I mean, yes and no. So the needle has moved a little, but it hasn't moved as much as I think any of us really would have liked. Yeah. So in terms of the work, let's just take the workforce. Right. So New York's workforce right now is about 24% or so diverse, what we would call like BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that's better than almost any other tech hub in the country. Okay. But at our theory is that innovation, and there's a lot of evidence to back this up, that teams that are diverse in all ways, that are ethnically diverse, that are gender diverse, that are perspective diverse. You and I were talking about how we're both kind of from the Midwest/South of the country, and yet we came to we went to the coast and really made our marks. When you have that kind of exciting sort of those sort of exciting collisions in teams, you end up building better products, and you can even have better investment outcomes. And so we really feel like New York startups deserve to have access to really diverse teams. Yeah. And so we want to drive that number. We want to drive that 24% number up.
100%. Even like just, backing founders who are diverse. I think the number is, and I'm messing this up right now, whether it's 2.2 or 0.02% of female founding teams get funding. Like it is
vanishingly small.
It's insane. Like it's incredibly, discomforting, as well as, a Mexican founder, like a lot of like Hispanics don't get a ton of funding as well. And I'm curious, what do venture capitalists need to do, or is there something that needs to be put in place to where, we need to recognize more of these kind of founding teams, or, allocate more capital towards those kind of teams? Or is it more, they need to know more about what venture capital is? Is it, just they're not getting funding, or do they just not know that venture funding is an option?
I would say two things. Number one, there was this really interesting report that was published in TechCrunch that basically said that underdog founders, women, immigrants, people of color, are disproportionately successful at building unicorns because, and you can look up the research, but it basically said that those are folks that have had to overcome something in their life, and to be successful at a startup, you've got to overcome a lot, right? Like it's pushing a boulder uphill. Sometimes you're innovating you're innovating every day. You are trying to deliver products that have never existed in the world. Sometimes you're building and growing in markets that are really nascent, that have barely existed. Yeah. And there are a million different ways that a startup can fail. And so that kind of underdog mentality is it really helps like founders sort of persist and be more successful. And yet even in at the beginning of our conversation, when you ask people, okay, name a great startup founder, they'll say Mark Zuckerberg.
Exactly.
They'll say Elon Musk. And so there's definitely a visual of what a startup founder is supposed to look like that actually runs against the data, which is that great founders and founders that are able to generate a tremendous amount of value can look like the entire quilt and tapestry of America.
100%.
So that's, I think, the number one thing that I'd ask for, that I would hope that more investors would understand.
You work really closely with founders, being at Primary. Do you have a piece of advice that you give most often to founders going from 0 to 1, or founders that are either raised their pre-seed round or they raised their seed round and they're trying to get to that next piece of the puzzle in their startup world, what is like the most consistent piece of advice you give founders?
The most consistent piece of advice I give to founders at the 0 to 1 phase is be more in love with your customer's problem than with your product.
I'm gonna say damn because that was a good one. Damn. Pardon my French.
Yeah, I mean, look, the biggest reason the early stage companies fail is because they have so lovingly created a beautiful product that nobody wants to buy.
Mm-hmm.
That is the number one reason that startups fail.
Yeah.
And how does that happen? Because I got to tell you, like I do meet founders all the time, and they are to a person really smart, really driven, really motivated by what it is that they are building. But it's just so easy when you are. It's almost an they're artisans. Like the best founders are almost like artisans of what it is that they're building, and they fall so in love with the build, with what they're building,
their vision,
they get so in love with their vision that they forget that what they really need to be in love with is the customer and the problem that customer is trying to solve.
That's so tough to get out of your own head because for maybe years you're building this thing, it's your baby, and then you got to realize like, oh my gosh, like to your advice, I got to focus on my customer's problem. What do they need? How do you untrain your brain to think that way? If there is a way to untrain it, or if it's much like you got to do it.
I would recommend that every founder put that up, like tack that up, someplace where they see it every single day. What problem am I trying to solve and for who? Because otherwise, the first thing that you think of when you get up every day is what am I trying to build today? And instead of what am I trying to build today, it's what am I trying to solve and for who? And then what to build ends up answering itself. What
about for you? What problem are you trying to solve right now?
Oh, what a great question.
Thank you.
I have two answers for that. So the first is I have been both a CEO and a founder and a founder CEO. Mm-hmm. And the way that most people get the job of CEO is not by like founding a company. The way that most people get the job of CEO is they spend years and years and years like training. They may go to business school and then they like lead larger and larger companies, or they grow up the ranks and lead larger and larger teams in their function. And so by the time they get that top job, they've got years, maybe decades of experience.
Okay.
And they're often taking over businesses that are super established and like really established markets. Founders become CEOs in a very different way. Like when you're a founder, not all, so there are some very experienced founders, but a lot of founders, they don't have a lot of years of experience of being like some seasoned manager, right?
Sometimes zero.
And sometimes exactly zero. So my mission with founders every day is to sort of share shortcuts and hacks so that they don't have to spend 20 years building up their management chops, and that they can kind of capably lead their teams, capably steward their boards, and really have impact in the world. So that's one. So that's my kind of my day job ambition.
Yeah.
I would say my life vision is helping organizations, investors, individuals break the trade-off between making money and making change in the world.
Dang, I feel like that's so hard because there can be a really strong push-pull in the sense of, impact versus making money. But is some of the advice you give that you can do both, or they don't have to be mutually exclusive?
Yeah, I firmly believe that it's a bit of a false trade-off. I think it's a bit of a false trade-off. I think that it's quite possible, and we've talked about one example today, which is primary working really hard to become the best seed investor, not just in New York, which I feel like is a goal achieved, but in the world by really supporting founders, including things like helping founders find access to the best talent, helping them find their first customers, and really sort of supporting them. And so with something like Factor, that was just an impact-oriented extension of the work we already do, which is going out and finding the best talent and connecting founders with that talent.
Yeah.
And so I think that people just aren't intentional enough. I think they aren't intentional enough in the way that they sort of spend their days and the way that they kind of look at the world to find the many, many, many opportunities to both have impact and generate great returns.
We'll close out this way, Lisa. And I think I'd be an idiot to not ask you this kind of question. You mentioned that you help a lot of founders, find, tricks and, ways to not take 20 years to become a CEO, right? I'm a founder, almost no years of like leading teams or being a manager of any sorts. And so, we're in the pre-seed phase and we have a board, and I'm curious, what advice would you give me as someone who's an early founder in a company that, is figuring out where we're going to go in our life from 0 to 1? What piece of advice or shortcut would you give me right now, without knowing a ton about me or what I do? But
yeah, I would say at the end of the day, it's all about the people that you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with people of quality in every way, like high IQ, high EQ, good values, and you stay open to the gifts that they will try to give you, whether it's their talent or their criticism or their or whatever it is that they're offering, you're going to be tremendously successful. So surround yourself with the greatest talent, the greatest people, and then stay open to what they have to offer you.
Lisa, I really appreciate your time. You can look into that camera. You can say where people can find you on social media, what Primary is up to, what else you got working on right now.
Amazing. So the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. Lisa Lewin. Just connect with me. And if I had one thing to say, check out Factor, factornyc.org. And I've really appreciated your time today.
Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you,
appreciate
Jackson.
it as well.
This was fun.
It was.